Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The morning of my wedding felt like a dream. The air was crisp, the sky was a perfect shade of blue, and I was about to marry the love of my life. My partner, Rachel, was in the next room, getting ready with her friends. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and excitement. Everything was falling into place until my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was my mom. A warm smile crossed my face as I answered, expecting to hear her gush about how proud she was or ask for last-minute directions. Instead, her voice was hesitant, almost nervous. "Hi, honey," she began, her words slow and deliberate. "Hey, Mom," I replied, my tone light. "You guys on your way?" There was a pause. Too long of a pause. "Sweetheart," she finally said, "I need to tell you something. Your dad and we're not coming today." At first, I thought I'd misheard. The room seemed to tilt, and I clutched the edge of the counter to steady myself. "You're not coming?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean you're not coming?" She sighed, and I could almost picture her sitting in her kitchen, wringing her hands the way she always did when she was about to deliver bad news. "Your brother, he's throwing a party today. For his promotion. And, well, we feel like we need to be there for him." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "A party?" I echoed. "You're skipping my wedding for a party?" "It's not just a party," she said quickly, as if that made it better. "It's a big moment for him, and he needs us there. You know how he gets when he's under pressure." I could barely process what I was hearing. "Mom, this is my wedding. My wedding. I don't care how under pressure he is. You promised you'd be here." There was a shuffle on the other end of the line, and then my dad's voice came through, gruff and uncomfortable. "Look, we're proud of you, okay? But your brother, he's family too. And this is important to him. More important than my wedding." I snapped, my voice rising. "It's not about choosing sides," he said, clearly irritated. "It's just complicated." "No," I said firmly, tears stinging my eyes. "It's not complicated. You're choosing him. Again, just like you always do." My dad sighed heavily. "We'll make it up to you," he said, as if that solved anything. "Don't bother," I said, my voice cold. "You've made your choice." I hung up before they could say anything else, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. Rachel found me a few minutes later, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. "What's wrong?" she asked, kneeling in front of me. "They're not coming," I said, my voice hollow. Her brow furrowed. "What? Why not?" I told her everything, the call, the excuses, the party. By the time I finished, my throat felt raw, and tears were threatening to spill. Rachel wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You don't deserve this." I nodded against her shoulder, too overwhelmed to respond. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The ceremony was beautiful, just as we'd planned. Our friends and Rachel's family were there, their smiles and laughter filling the room. But every time I looked out at the crowd, the empty seats where my parents were supposed to be felt like a gaping hole. Afterward, during the reception, people kept asking where my parents were. Something came up, I lied, forcing a smile. Rachel's dad gave me a knowing look and patted me on the back, but he didn't press for details. When the speeches started, my best man, David, took the microphone. To two people who clearly belonged together, he began, his voice warm and steady. "It's an honor to stand here today and celebrate your love. And to those who couldn't be here, well, they missed out on something amazing." The room erupted in cheers, but I could only manage a weak smile. His words were meant to comfort me, but they only reminded me of the absence I couldn't ignore. That night, as Rachel and I sat in our hotel room, exhausted but happy, she reached for my hand. "You know it's not your fault, right?" she said softly. "I know," I replied, though deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed it. Lying in the dark, I replayed the call over and over in my head. Their excuses, their dismissal, their choice to prioritize my brother over me. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about a lifetime of always being second best. As sleep finally overtook me, one thought lingered in my mind. They had made their choice. Now I had to decide if I could ever forgive them for it. The morning after the wedding, I sat alone in the quiet of our honeymoon suite, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee. Rachel was still asleep, her soft breathing the only sound in the room. But my mind was far from peaceful. I couldn't stop thinking about the call, the excuses, and the choice my parents had made. The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. If I was being honest with myself, I'd spent my whole life in the shadow of my brother, Eric. Eric was the golden child, the favorite. the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, it felt like our parents had a bottomless well of love, patience, and attention for him, and a shallow puddle left for me. One memory in particular stood out. I was 8 years old, and it was the night of my school play. I had worked so hard to memorize my lines, staying up late rehearsing in front of my stuffed animals. When the big night finally came, I scanned the audience, searching for my parents. They weren't there. I still remember standing backstage, my teacher gently telling me they'd called to say Eric had a soccer game, and they couldn't make it. A soccer game. It wasn't even a championship, just a regular season match. But in their eyes, that game was more important than my moment on stage. When I confronted them later, my mom said, "We couldn't let your brother down. You understand, don't you?" I didn't understand. Not then, and not now. As we got older, the favoritism became harder to ignore. Eric was always in trouble, skipping school, breaking curfew, getting into fights, but my parents treated him like he was untouchable. "He's just figuring things out," they'd say. "You know how boys can be." Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the invisible one. In high school, I joined the debate team and won my first competition. I came home beaming, clutching my trophy, only to find my parents too preoccupied with Eric's latest drama to even ask how my day had gone. "Not now," my dad had said, waving me off. "Your brother's going through something." It didn't matter what I accomplished. Eric's needs always came first. The most blatant example came during college. I'd worked tirelessly to earn scholarships and took on part-time jobs to cover the rest of my tuition. Meanwhile, Eric dropped out after one semester, leaving behind a mountain of student loan debt. My parents paid it off without hesitation. "He's just not as focused as you," my mom explained. "We have to help him out." I didn't argue. What was the point? But inside, resentment simmered, a slow burn that never quite went away. Even after we graduated, the pattern continued. Eric bounced from one job to the next while I built a stable career. Yet, whenever I called home, the conversation inevitably revolved around him. His struggles, his plans, his potential. "Don't be so hard on him," my mom would say. "He's trying," and I wasn't. By the time Rachel and I got engaged, I'd resigned myself to the idea that my relationship with my parents would always feel unbalanced. But I thought my wedding might be different. I thought maybe, just this once, they'd put me first. Instead, they'd skip the most important day of my life to celebrate Eric's promotion. A promotion at a job he'd only had for 6 months. As I sat in the hotel room, replaying it all in my mind, a familiar wave of bitterness washed over me. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like I didn't matter. When Rachel woke up, she found me staring out the window, lost in thought. She wrapped her arms around me, resting her chin on my shoulder. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" I nodded. "It's just, this isn't new, you know. They've always treated Eric like he's the center of the universe. I don't know why I thought this time would be any different." Rachel kissed my cheek gently. "Because you deserve better. And deep down, you hoped they'd finally see that." Her words hit me hard, the truth of them sinking in. I'd hoped, despite everything, I'd wanted to believe they could change. But they hadn't. That day, Rachel and I went for a long walk along the beach, the salty air and crashing waves offering some solace. She didn't press me to talk, letting me process things at my own pace. By the time we returned to the hotel, I'd made a decision. I couldn't keep letting my parents' favoritism define my worth. If they couldn't see me for who I was, then maybe it was time I stopped trying to make them. For the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: freedom. The question now was what I was going to do with it. The morning after the wedding, I woke up with a weight in my chest that refused to lift. The events of the day before replayed in my mind like a cruel highlight reel. The laughter of guests, Rachel's radiant smile, the heartfelt toast from our closest friends. All of it should have felt perfect. But no matter how hard I tried, the glaring absence of my parents overshadowed everything. As Rachel stirred beside me, I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen of the small cabin we'd rented for our mini honeymoon. The quiet buzz of the coffee maker filled the air, but my thoughts were loud, drowning out everything else. I sat down at the table with a steaming cup, staring out at the trees swaying in the breeze. It wasn't just that they didn't come. It was the ripple effect their absence had caused. During the reception, the question started almost immediately. "Where are your parents?" Aunt Clara had asked, a glass of champagne in her hand. "They're not here yet?" I'd forced a tight smile. "Something came up." "Oh no, is everything okay?" She pressed, her face a mask of concern. "They're fine," I said quickly, desperate to end the conversation. "Just a scheduling conflict." The lie tasted bitter, but what could I say? That my parents skipped my wedding for a party? That the people who were supposed to love me most had chosen my brother over me? Yet again, word must have spread, because by the time the night was over, I'd lost count of the sympathetic glances and awkward pats on the back. It felt like everyone in the room knew, and their pity was worse than their curiosity. David, my best man, pulled me aside halfway through the night. "You doing okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I hesitated, not sure how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. I thought I'd be angry, but mostly, I just feel embarrassed. David nodded, his expression serious. "They made their choice, man. It sucks, but don't let it ruin this for you. You've got Rachel, and that's what matters." He was right, of course. Rachel was what mattered. But as I looked out at the dance floor, watching her spin and laugh with her friends, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The moments that should have been joyful felt tainted. When Rachel's dad stood to give his toast, his voice warm and full of pride, I couldn't help but think about what my dad would have said if he'd been there. When her mom hugged me tightly, welcoming me into the family, I thought about how my own mom hadn't even called to check in. By the end of the night, I was emotionally drained. Rachel must have sensed it because she leaned in close during our final dance and whispered, "We'll get through this together." Her words were a balm, but the wound was still raw. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen, I felt that rawness all over again. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from my cousin Sarah. "Hey, just wanted to say your wedding was beautiful. I can't believe your parents didn't show. You didn't deserve that." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. I appreciated her words, but they were a reminder of the very thing I was trying to forget. A second text came in moments later. This one was from Rachel's dad. "If you need anything, you let me know. We're proud to have you in the family." Tears pricked at my eyes. It was kind, and I knew he meant it, but it also deepened the ache inside me. How was it that Rachel's family, who'd known me for a fraction of the time, could show more love and support than my own parents? When Rachel finally joined me, she wrapped her arms around my shoulders and kissed the top of my head. "You're thinking about them again, aren't you?" I nodded, setting my coffee down. "It's hard not to." She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, her eyes searching mine. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Whether you want to talk to them or not, whether you want to forgive them or not, it's all up to you. Just don't carry this alone." I reached across the table and took her hand, grateful for her steadiness. "I don't know if I can forgive them," I admitted. "Not after this." "You don't have to know yet," she said softly. "But whatever you decide, I'm here." Her words stayed with me as we packed up and left the cabin later that day. As we drove back to the city, the ache in my chest remained, but so did Rachel's reassurance. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my parents, but I did know one thing. They'd left a scar that wouldn't heal easily. Whether they realized it or not, their choice to prioritize Eric over me had changed everything. The question now was whether I even wanted to try to rebuild the bridge they'd burned. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding when my parents called. I hadn't spoken to them since their half-hearted excuse over the phone that morning, and part of me had hoped they'd stay silent. But when my mom's name flashed on the screen, I hesitated. After a long moment, I answered. "Hello, honey," my mom said, her voice overly bright, as if nothing had happened. "We were hoping we could come over. Your dad and I want to talk." I clenched my jaw. "About what?" She paused, and her tone softened. "About the wedding. About everything. We want to explain." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. I chose a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, because the thought of them in my home felt like an invasion. When I arrived, they were already seated at a corner table. My mom waved me over, her face a mask of nervous optimism, while my dad looked at me with that familiar mix of authority and discomfort. "Thanks for coming," my mom said as I sat down, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "I didn't come for pleasantries," I replied, my voice cold. "You wanted to talk. So talk." She glanced at my dad, who cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Look, we know you're upset." "Upset?" I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. "You skipped my wedding." Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. My mom sighed, her eyes pleading. "We didn't mean to hurt you. It's just that your brother, well, you know how he is. He needed us that day." I let out a bitter laugh. "He needed you? For what? To cut a cake and open some champagne?" Meanwhile, I was getting married, the most important day of my life, and you couldn't bother to show up? "It wasn't that simple," my dad said, his tone defensive. Eric's party was a big deal for him. He was under a lot of pressure with this promotion, and I wasn't under pressure. I shot back. I wasn't nervous or stressed about my wedding. Do you even hear yourselves right now? My mom reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. Sweetheart, you have to understand. We didn't want to choose between you and Eric. But you did. I snapped, my voice shaking. You always choose him. My whole life it's been Eric this, Eric that. He screws up, and you bend over backward to fix it. I succeed, and you barely notice. The words spilled out before I could stop them. Years of pent-up frustration finally breaking through. Do you know how it felt growing up? Watching you drop everything for him, while I had to fend for myself? I worked my ass off to make you proud, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. Not compared to him. My dad looked away, his jaw tight, while my mom's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair, she said softly. Not fair? I repeated, incredulous. What's not fair is being treated like an afterthought. What's not fair is having my parents skip my wedding because my brother threw a party. We didn't mean for it to come across that way, my dad said, his voice strained. We love you both. Then why don't you show it? I countered. Why does loving Eric always mean sacrificing me? The tension at the table was suffocating. My mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, while my dad stared down at his coffee. Neither of them seemed to have an answer. After a long silence, my mom finally spoke. We made a mistake. We thought you'd understand. Understand? I said, shaking my head. You thought I'd understand that my wedding wasn't important enough for you to show up? Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? We didn't mean to hurt you, my dad repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true. Well, you did, I said, my voice cold. And honestly, I don't know if I can forgive you for it. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My mom's face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I almost felt guilty. But then I remembered the hollow ache in my chest as I scanned the crowd at my wedding, searching for faces that weren't there. I think we should go, I said, standing up. I've heard enough excuses for a lifetime. Honey, wait, my mom pleaded, reaching for me. But I shook my head. I can't do this right now. Maybe not ever. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. For years, I'd swallowed my anger, buried my hurt, and told myself that someday, things would get better. But as I stepped into the crisp afternoon air, I realized something. I didn't have to keep waiting for them to change. They made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I wasn't surprised when Eric called a few days after my confrontation with our parents. What did surprise me was the tone of his voice. Casual, almost cheerful, as though nothing had happened. Hey, heard you met with Mom and Dad, he said. How'd that go? I gritted my teeth, gripping the phone tighter. How do you think it went? There was a pause, followed by a sigh. Look, I didn't even know they weren't going to your wedding until the day of. They didn't tell me. Really? I said, my voice dripping with skepticism. You threw a party on the same day as my wedding, and you expect me to believe you didn't know. I didn't plan the date, okay? He said defensively. My boss set it up to celebrate my promotion. It wasn't like I picked it to screw you over. I could feel my frustration boiling over. Whether you picked the date or not, you knew it conflicted with my wedding. You could have told them not to come, Eric. You could have told them, hey, this is my brother's big day. Go support him. Eric let out a laugh, short and humorless. Why is this suddenly my fault? I didn't ask them to skip your wedding. That was their choice. That's exactly my point. I snapped. It was their choice, and they chose you. Again. And instead of doing anything about it, you just went along with it like you always do. Hold on, Eric said, his tone growing sharper. You don't get to blame me for their decisions. I didn't force them to do anything. If they messed up, that's on them, not me. His words stung because there was truth in them. My parents were the ones who had chosen to prioritize him, but Eric's refusal to acknowledge the bigger picture felt like another betrayal. You don't get it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You've always been their favorite. They've always bent over backward for you, no matter what. And yeah, maybe you didn't ask for it, but you benefited from it. And now, you're acting like none of it matters. Eric scoffed. So what? This is all about favoritism now? You think I had it easy growing up? Do you know how much pressure they put on me to succeed? Do you know what it's like being the one they always expect to deliver? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Pressure? Are you serious? Eric, they paid off your college debt. They bailed you out of every screw-up. Meanwhile, I had to work 3 part-time jobs just to get through school. So don't talk to me about pressure. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear Eric breathing heavily on the other end of the line, probably pacing his apartment like he always did when he was worked up. Look, he said finally, his tone more measured. I didn't mean for this to happen. If I'd known they were going to skip your wedding, I would have told them not to. But it's not like I can control them. I clenched my jaw, biting back the words I wanted to say. It wasn't just about controlling them. It was about standing up for me. For once. Do you even care? I asked quietly. That they didn't come? That they chose your party over my wedding? Eric hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. Of course I care, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I just think you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not like they didn't want to be there. They just thought my party was important too. I laughed bitterly. That's exactly the problem, Eric. They think everything you do is more important than anything I do. And the fact that you're okay with that tells me all I need to know. Jesus, you're being dramatic, Eric muttered. I'm trying to tell you I didn't mean for this to happen. But if you're just looking for someone to blame, fine. Blame me. Add it to the list of things you resent me for. I don't need to add it, I said coldly. It's already there. Eric sighed, clearly frustrated. I'm sorry, okay? I don't know what else you want me to say. I don't want your apology, I replied. I want you to stop acting like this doesn't matter. Because it does. It mattered to me. There was another long pause, and when Eric finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Look, I'm sorry they hurt you. I really am. But I don't think cutting them off is the answer. That's easy for you to say, I shot back. You're not the one they've been ignoring your whole life. The conversation ended not long after, with Eric making some half-hearted promise to talk to our parents. But as I hung up the phone, I knew nothing would come of it. Eric would always find a way to justify their behavior. He'd always see himself as separate from their favoritism, as though being the golden child absolved him of responsibility. I felt a familiar mix of anger and sadness settle over me, the weight of years of neglect pressing down like a heavy stone. My parents might have been the ones who failed me, but Eric had played his part too, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The decision to cut ties wasn't a dramatic declaration or a fiery confrontation. It was a quiet moment of clarity, the kind that creeps in when you're too tired to keep fighting. I'd spent days replaying the phone call with Eric and the coffee shop meeting with my parents. Every word, every excuse, every moment of dismissal had etched itself into my mind like a scar. I realized I was chasing something I would never get: acknowledgement, accountability, an apology that felt real. One night, as Rachel and I sat on the couch watching a mindless sitcom, the thought hit me with startling simplicity. I don't have to keep doing this. The next morning, I sat down with my laptop and opened my email. The blank page stared back at me as I searched for the right words. I didn't want to pour my soul into a message they wouldn't truly read or appreciate. I just needed to be clear. Subject: moving forward. Mom, Dad, and Eric. I've thought long and hard about everything that's happened. Not just the wedding, but everything leading up to it. I've realized that our relationship isn't healthy for me. I can't keep putting myself in a position where I feel like I'm begging for your love or attention. For my own peace of mind, I need to take a step back. I need space to heal and move forward without the constant weight of this dynamic. I hope you can respect that. I wish you all the best. Alex ***. I read it over a dozen times before hitting send. As soon as I did, a wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't joy or triumph. It was more like a weight had been lifted. But underneath it all, there was an ache I couldn't ignore. The first few days felt strangely calm. No calls, no emails, no responses. I almost believed they'd accepted my decision without a fight. But then the text started. Mom, honey, can we please talk? We're family. This isn't how we should handle things. Dad, I know you're upset, but cutting us off isn't the answer. Let's work this out. Eric, this is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. Stop punishing everyone. Each message felt like a tiny jab, reopening wounds I was trying to let heal. But I didn't reply. I couldn't. Rachel noticed my mood shift as the days went on. You don't have to read their messages, you know, she said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table. I know, I admitted, setting my phone face down. But it's hard not to. She reached across the table and took my hand. You're doing this for a reason. You deserve peace, even if it doesn't come easy. Her words helped, but the ache remained. Cutting them off felt like severing a part of myself. No matter how toxic the relationship had been, they were still my family. Walking away wasn't as simple as just hitting send on an email. It was an emotional amputation. The hardest part was explaining my decision to other people. Friends and extended family reached out after the wedding, offering congratulations and asking about my parents. When I told them the truth, the reactions varied. Some were supportive. Good for you, one friend said. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of favoritism. Others were less understanding. But they're your family, an aunt had said, her voice dripping with judgment. Family is everything. That phrase, family is everything, stuck with me. It felt like a weapon used to guilt me into tolerating behavior that had caused me pain for years. Why did being related by blood mean I had to endure being treated like I didn't matter? As the weeks passed, the relief started to outweigh the grief. Without their constant presence in my life, I felt lighter, freer. I no longer had to brace myself for dismissive comments or excuses. I no longer had to compete for their attention. But there were moments when the absence hit hard. On Sunday mornings, when I used to call my mom for a chat. On Eric's birthday, when I debated whether to send a text and ultimately decided against it. One evening, Rachel found me staring at an old photo album, a picture of my parents and me at a school event when I was 8. I'd been so proud that day, holding up a certificate I'd won for an essay contest. My mom had her arm around me, smiling. "Do you regret it?" Rachel asked softly, sitting beside me. I shook my head, though my voice wavered. "No, I wish it didn't have to be this way." Estrangement isn't a clean break. It's messy and painful, full of second-guessing and unresolved emotions. But it was the right choice for me. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. And while it didn't erase the hurt, it gave me the space I needed to start healing. Whether or not they ever understood, that wasn't my responsibility. It was theirs. It had been nearly 6 months since I'd cut ties with my parents and Eric. In that time, I'd managed to carve out a life that felt lighter, quieter, and most importantly mine. The days were no longer weighed down by their opinions, their favoritism, or their excuses. Rachel and I had settled into a routine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was free to just exist without constantly second-guessing my worth. I thought I'd put everything behind me, until the day I came home to find a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mom's. I debated tossing it straight into the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. Sitting at the kitchen table, I tore it open and unfolded the crisp paper. "Dear Alex, we've been giving you space like you asked, but it's been so hard not talking to you. Your dad and I think about you every day. We miss you. We miss hearing your voice and knowing how you're doing. We know we've made mistakes. If we could go back and do things differently, we would. We never wanted to hurt you. You mean so much to us, and it breaks our hearts that we've let you down. Can we please talk? We want to fix this. We just want our family to feel whole again, asterisk, asterisk. Love, Mom." I read the letter twice. My emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and the faintest glimmer of hope. It was what I'd wanted to hear for so long, an acknowledgement that they'd let me down. But as I read between the lines, I noticed something missing. True accountability. They were sorry for how things turned out, but not for what they'd done. There was no mention of the wedding, of skipping my big day, of years of prioritizing Eric at my expense. The words felt hollow, like a performance meant to draw me back in without addressing the root of the problem. When Rachel came home that evening, I showed her the letter. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" I asked when she finished. She set the letter down carefully. "I think it's up to you. But be honest with yourself. Are they reaching out because they've changed, or because they want to ease their own guilt?" Rachel's words stayed with me as I mulled over what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter entirely, to let the silence continue. But another part of me, the part that still longed for their approval, for closure, couldn't let it go. Eventually, I agreed to meet them. We chose a small diner on the edge of town, far enough from home that it didn't feel too personal. I arrived early, my stomach churning as I sipped a cup of watery coffee. When they walked in, my mom's face lit up, a hopeful smile spreading across her lips. My dad followed close behind, his expression guarded but relieved. "Hi, sweetheart," my mom said, reaching for me like nothing had changed. I stepped back, raising a hand. "Let's just sit down." We slid into the booth, the atmosphere thick with tension. My mom launched into small talk, asking about Rachel, my job, anything she could think of to fill the silence. I cut her off. "Why am I here?" I asked, my voice firm. "What do you want from me?" She blinked, her smile faltering. "We want to fix this," she said. "We miss you. We miss our family." "You miss me?" I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. "Where was that when you skipped my wedding?" My dad cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We've already apologized for that." "No," I said sharply. "You've apologized for how I feel, not for what you did. There's a difference." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. We thought you'd understand that Eric needed us, and I didn't?" I asked, my voice rising. On the most important day of my life, I didn't need you? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to stand there, explaining to everyone why my parents weren't there? My dad looked down at the table, his jaw tightening. We made a mistake. What else do you want us to say? I want you to admit that you've been doing this my entire life, I said, my voice shaking. I want you to admit that you've always chosen him over me. The silence that followed was deafening. My mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, while my dad refused to meet my gaze. We didn't realize it felt that way, my mom said finally. How could you not? I asked. How could you not see the way you always prioritized him, no matter what? And now you want me to just move on? Pretend like everything's fine? We're not perfect, my dad said, his tone defensive. But we're still your parents. Family sticks together. I laughed bitterly. Family? You only remember that when it's convenient for you. They tried to backtrack, to offer more excuses and half-hearted apologies, but I couldn't take it anymore. I slid out of the booth, grabbing my coat. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice steady but cold. And if you can't even admit what you've done, I don't see how this gets fixed. My mom reached for my arm as I turned to leave. Please, honey, don't do this. I shook her hand off. You already did. Walking out of that diner, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger, but most of all, exhaustion. They claimed to want a second chance, but without true accountability, how could I give it to them? It had been weeks since the tense encounter at the diner. I'd left that meeting convinced I was done trying, that no amount of their pleas or excuses could undo the damage they'd caused. Yet, when my mom called again, this time leaving a long, tearful voicemail, I found myself wavering. Rachel, as always, was my sounding board. You don't owe them anything, she said gently as we sat on the couch that evening. But if you feel like there's something left to say, it's okay to give yourself that closure. Her words stayed with me, and after days of deliberation, I texted my mom back. One more conversation. That's it. We met at their house, a place that used to feel like home, but now felt like enemy territory. As I pulled into the driveway, memories flooded back. Birthdays, holidays, moments of laughter that now felt tainted by years of favoritism and neglect. My mom opened the door before I even reached it, her face lined with worry. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I nodded, but didn't respond. My dad was already seated at the kitchen table, his expression a mix of guilt and defensiveness. I sat across from them, arms crossed. So, here I am. What do you want to say? My mom started, her voice trembling. We've been talking a lot since the diner about everything. About the wedding, about how you feel. And we realize now that we hurt you in ways we didn't fully understand. Didn't fully understand? I repeated, my voice sharp. It's not like I haven't told you before. I've spent my entire life being second place to Eric, and you've brushed it off every single time. What's different now? My dad shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. We didn't realize it was that bad, he muttered. We thought you knew how much we cared, even if we didn't always show it the right way. I leaned forward, anger bubbling to the surface. How was I supposed to know that when you never said it? When your actions always showed the opposite? My mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. We made mistakes, she said, her voice cracking. We made a lot of mistakes. And I know saying sorry isn't enough, but we are sorry. We truly are. My dad finally spoke up, his tone more defensive. Look, we did the best we could with what we had. Maybe we didn't handle things perfectly, but we were just trying to keep the family together. That's the problem, I snapped. You weren't trying to keep the family together. You were trying to keep Eric happy, no matter what it cost the rest of us. And now you're acting like this is some big misunderstanding, like I'm blowing things out of proportion. We're not saying that, my mom said quickly. We know we've hurt you. We know we let you down. But we're here now, trying to make things right. I let out a bitter laugh. Make things right? You skipped my wedding. You prioritized a party over the most important day of my life. And it's not just that. It's everything that led up to it. Every time you ignored me, every time you bailed him out, every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough. How do you even begin to make that right? Neither of them had an answer. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and my dad stared at the table, his jaw clenched. We can't change the past, my mom said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But we want to move forward. We want to be better for you, for the family. Please just give us a chance. I sat back in my chair, the weight of their words pressing down on me. A part of me wanted to believe them, to hold on to the hope that maybe they could change. But another part of me couldn't ignore the years of hurt. The countless times they'd promised to do better only to fall back into the same patterns. I don't know if I can trust you, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. And without trust, I don't see how we move forward. We'll earn it back, my dad said, his tone earnest for the first time that evening. If that's what it takes, we'll do it. Just don't shut us out completely. I looked at them, searching for any sign that their words were more than empty promises. I'll think about it, I said, standing up, but I'm not making any guarantees. As I walked out of the house, I felt no sense of closure, no clarity. Instead, I felt the same mix of anger, sadness, and exhaustion that had followed me for years. They claimed they wanted to make things right, but I wasn't sure if they even knew how. Trust wasn't something they could just ask for. It was something they had to earn. And right now, I wasn't sure if I was ready to let them try. The question lingered in my mind as I drove away. Was I holding on to the pain because it was safer than risking being hurt again? Or was I finally learning to protect myself? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The house was quiet as I sat at the kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of me. The weight of everything I wanted to say pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Rachel sat across from me, her presence steady and reassuring, but she didn't say much. This was something I needed to do on my own. I don't even know where to start, I admitted, staring at the empty page. Start with the truth, she said gently. The rest will follow. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the pen and began to write. Dear Mom and Dad, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've talked about these past few months. About the wedding, about the way I grew up, and about the relationship we have or don't have now. It's not easy for me to put all of this into words, but I'm going to try because I need you to understand how I feel. First, I want to say that I don't hate you. I never have. If anything, that's what makes this so hard. I love you both, but I can't ignore the ways you've hurt me. The way you've always prioritized Eric, even when it came at my expense. The way you've dismissed my feelings and treated me like I was less important. I know you didn't do it to be malicious. I know you thought you were doing what was best for the family. But the impact it had on me is something I've carried my whole life. And it came to a head on my wedding day. I paused, my hand trembling slightly as I reread the words. Memories of that day came rushing back. The excitement I'd felt, the hollow ache when they didn't show up, the questions from friends and family that I couldn't bring myself to answer. Rachel reached over and placed her hand on mine, grounding me. I nodded, took another deep breath, and kept writing. When you chose to go to Eric's party instead of my wedding, it wasn't just a scheduling conflict or a misunderstanding. It was a choice that told me, once again, that I wasn't a priority, that my happiness, my milestone, wasn't as important as his. That choice hurt me more than I can put into words. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything that led up to it. Every time you brushed off my accomplishments to focus on his struggles. Every time you expected me to understand why he deserved more of your attention, your time, your love. I've spent my whole life trying to earn your approval, to prove that I was worth just as much as him. But I'm done chasing something that I don't think you're capable of giving. My chest felt tight as I wrote those words, the truth of them sinking in. I didn't want to hurt them, but I couldn't keep protecting their feelings at the expense of my own. I'm not writing this letter to attack you or make you feel guilty. I'm writing it because I need to set boundaries. I need you to understand that I can't keep putting myself in situations where I feel unseen and unvalued. I can't keep reopening wounds that you don't seem willing to acknowledge. If we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, it has to be on new terms. It has to be built on mutual respect and understanding. That means listening to me when I tell you how I feel instead of brushing it off or making excuses. It means acknowledging the ways you've hurt me and taking real steps to do better. I'm not expecting perfection. I know change takes time, but I need to see that you're willing to try. Until then, I need space. The words came easier now, the weight lifting slightly with each sentence. I hope you'll take this seriously. I hope you'll think about what I've said and consider what kind of relationship you want to have with me. Because I want one. I really do. But it has to be healthy. It has to be different from what we've had before. I love you, but I need to love myself enough to protect my peace. Alex, I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair, exhaustion washing over me. Rachel read the letter, nodding quietly as she went. It's honest, she said finally. And it's fair. Do you think they'll listen? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. I don't know, she admitted. But you did what you needed to do. That's what matters. The next day, I mailed the letter, my heart pounding as I dropped it into the mailbox. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd taken control of my own narrative. Whether or not they responded, whether or not they changed, wasn't up to me. What mattered was that I'd spoken my truth and set the boundaries I needed to heal. As I walked away, a small but steady sense of peace began to grow. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was a step toward closure. And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed after I mailed the letter. At first, I checked the mailbox and my phone obsessively, half dreading and half hoping for a response. But the days turned into weeks, and silence settled in. It wasn't the kind of silence I had expected. It wasn't deafening or painful. Instead, it was oddly peaceful, as if the absence of their words was better than hearing more excuses or shallow apologies. Rachel and I carried on with our lives, focusing on the future we were building together. Still, the unanswered questions lingered in quiet moments. What were they thinking? Did they read the letter? Did it matter to them at all? One Friday evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from my mom. "We got your letter. Thank you for sharing how you feel. We're trying to reflect on everything you said. We'd like to talk when you're ready." Rachel noticed the change in my expression. "What is it?" she asked, setting her tea down. "It's from my mom," I said, handing her the phone. She read it and nodded slowly. "What do you think?" "I don't know," I admitted, sinking into the cushions. "It's something, but it's not enough. It's not action." Rachel leaned against me, her presence grounding. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. It's okay to take your time." She was right. I didn't reply that night or the next. I needed to figure out what I wanted. Not what they wanted, not what anyone expected of me, but what I needed to move forward. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I called them. The phone rang twice before my mom answered. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice tentative. "Hi," I replied, unsure of where to start. "I got your text. I'm glad you called," she said. "Your dad's here too. We've been talking a lot about your letter." I waited, letting the silence stretch. Finally, my dad spoke. "We messed up a lot. And reading what you wrote, it was hard, but it made us realize how much we took for granted." My mom chimed in. "We didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter. We thought we were doing the right thing, but we see now how much we hurt you." Their words sounded genuine, but I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind. Is this real? Or are they just saying what they think I want to hear? "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. "We want to rebuild our relationship," my mom said. "We want to do better, to be better parents to you." "And what does that look like to you?" I pressed. Because words are easy. Promises are easy. But I've heard them before, and nothing changed. The line went quiet for a moment, and then my dad spoke. "We don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but we're willing to put in the work. We'll follow your lead. Do things on your terms." It was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from him, but it still felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting to collapse. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," I said finally, my voice breaking slightly. "I want to, but I can't just forget everything that's happened." "We understand," my mom said. "We're not asking you to forget. We just want a chance to earn back your trust." "I don't know if that's possible," I admitted. "But I'm not saying no." Rachel walked into the room just then, meeting my eyes with a look of quiet encouragement. I felt her support in that moment, her belief that I could decide what was best for me, no matter how messy or complicated it was. "I'll think about it," I said into the phone. "That's the best I can do right now." We ended the call shortly after, and I sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window at the fading sunlight. Rachel sat beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. "How do you feel?" she asked after a while. "Conflicted," I said honestly. "I want to believe they can change, but part of me is terrified of getting hurt again." She nodded. "That's okay. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take it one step at a time." As the days went on, I found myself returning to the idea of forgiveness, not as something I owed them, but as something I might owe myself. Carrying the weight of anger and hurt was exhausting, and while cutting them off had given me space, it hadn't erased the scars. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about letting them back in fully. Maybe it was about letting go of the hold their actions had over me. For now, I wasn't ready to open the door completely, but I wasn't ready to slam it shut either. The story ends there, with no neat resolution, no clear answers. The relationship between my parents and me remains fragile, suspended in the space between hope and doubt. And maybe that's okay, because life isn't about perfect endings. It's about finding the strength to navigate the messy, complicated middle.